Seat. Commissioner Mccord has his coffee, so we can get going now. Want to welcome everybody to our board meeting. It's so nice to see everybody in person. Thanks for your diligence through the last several meetings where we had to do this digitally, but we're just happy to have everyone here and present, and thank you for being part of that. So, welcome. What else do we want to say? We want to talk about the fact that this is on YouTube. It's being broadcast, so be aware of that. If you're going to speak, make sure that you hit the little button on this microphone in front of you so that the light shows up green, and that way everybody in the room can hear you and those watching online. All right, what do we want to do? We want to take a roll call first. So turn it over to Eiler for a roll call.
Good morning. As I call your name, please confirm your attendance audibly. If you are a member of a local workforce development board, please state the local board. And if you are representing by proxy, please state your name for the record. Martha Axford.
Present. I am Chair of East Tennessee.
Brandy Faust for State Senator Paul Bailey. Assistant Commissioner Jay Baker.
Present.
Jason Bates.
Present.
Tim Berry.
Present.
Sarah Noel for State Representative Clark Boyd. Ronnie Brewer. Mayor Kevin Brooks. Jonathan Cantrell.
Present.
Deputy Commissioner Sherelle Campbell-Street for Commissioner Clarence Carter.
Present.
Michelle Falcone. Ben Ferguson.
Jason Bates, proxy.
Bill Godwin. Marshall Graves.
Present for Southeast.
Ann Hatcher.
Present.
Christine Hopkins.
Present. Southern Middle.
Rick Isaacson. J. Paul Jackson.
Present.
Assistant Commissioner Mandy Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Jeff McCord.
Present.
Vonda McDaniel.
Present.
Mayor E.L. Morton.
Present.
Policy Director Tony Nicknajad for Governor Bill Lee.
Present.
Greg Persinger.
Jason Bates, proxy.
Stuart Price.
Present.
Barry Ray.
Proxy, Stuart Price.
Director Ann Thompson for Commissioner Bob Rolfe. Chief of Programs Jean Luna for Commissioner Penny Schwinn.
Present.
Kyle Spurgeon. Jeff Vance.
Present.
Kevin Vaughn.
Present.
Rusty Vi. Ron Wade.
Present.
Chairman Berry, we have a quorum.
Excellent, thank you. You know, I know we've introduced these new members virtually, but this is the first time we've seen them at a live meeting, so just want to acknowledge Rick Isaacson and Jonathan Cantrell, J. Paul Jackson, Jeff Vance, Rusty Vi, and Ron Wade. Nice to see faces instead of screens, so thanks again for your participation, and it's good to see you in person this time. You'll notice that the agenda does not have a break included, so we're going to push through this meeting. You can thank me if that's something you like. You can hate me if it's something you don't, but that was my thing. So I was hoping that would encourage our presentations to be as efficient as possible. All right, next, as we mentioned at our last meeting, you know, one of our roles is to make sure that we are a highly effective board. And we talked about getting certified as a board. You know, there's a national benchmark for that. And so we're going to be working on that and toward that. And it's a process, and you're going to be hearing a little more about that process later on today. So we're not quite there yet, but it is in motion. So I didn't want you to think that wasn't necessarily in the agenda today, but wanted to let you know that is still in the works, and we'll hear a little more tidbit about that later. All right. I think I've covered everything in the opening notes. So let's ask, hopefully you've read through the minutes from the last meeting, and I'll look for a motion to accept those minutes as presented.
Chair Barry, I'll make that motion. Vonda McDaniel.
Thank you, Vonda. Any second?
I'll second.
Okay, I hear a Martha, a second. Any discussion about the minutes from the last meeting? Okay, all in favor of approving as the motion stated, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The minutes have been approved. Thanks. All right, Commissioner Mccord, what words do you have for us today?
Hello, everyone. First, I do want to make it known that Chairman Barry is the one who turned up the heat since he can't use his treadmill on virtually. And he's trying to continue his efforts. So you know, like him or hate him, I mean, that's been my line for the last month and a year and a half. So it's really, really good to see everybody around this table. And really, we're in a different spot completely than we were even several months ago. BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, has a report out monthly that tracks the number of job openings and the number of layoffs. Not surprisingly to us, in April, it was the highest number of job openings ever recorded and the fewest number of layoffs ever recorded. And so we're in a completely different situation. I'm always slow to say crisis, but whatever the little brother of the crisis is, maybe that's where we are, and there's a lot of opportunity in that. There are opportunity for us to connect to pipelines that we maybe have been reluctant to in the past, like previously incarcerated, our military transition, our work-based learning programs, or the fact that we have a large adult education population that we can connect to and bring along. And on the employer side, which is always going to be the key, generating that demand first by understanding what that opportunity is part of what we're going to be doing the next couple of, in July, we're going to have a couple of weeks in July, mid-July, where we're visiting employers all throughout the state and talking to them about, here's the situation that we're in, no reason to sugarcoat it, but we can do really two things. We can help build some common infrastructure, and then we can get stuff that's keeping things from happening out of the way. And that's our levers that we have. So what are those things? What are those common infrastructures? And then hear back about what are those things we potentially need to get out of the way. And additionally, you'll begin to see, hopefully, starting Monday, we'll have, on the supply side of this equation, have a statewide ad campaign to help connect job seekers, job needers to services that we have. It's something that I'm not sure we've ever done before, but it's a big campaign, social media, radio, and the whole 9 yards to again, for that opportunity awareness for those who are looking for jobs and maybe connect to folks that we haven't connected to before. This is it's a challenge, but it's a lot funner challenge. It's one that we're geared to do and want to do. And we'll give an update at the next meeting that we have, how that's going, where we are. And hopefully it'll be good, because tentatively the governor's going to be here with us as well. As you know, the workforce development conversation is high on his list of priorities, and always a good conversation with somebody who's really, really fluent in what we're talking about. So So anyway, if this whole visit thing and ad campaign fails, I probably won't show up for the next meeting, and you tell the governor I said hi. But I am perfectly confident that that won't happen, that we'll be able to move forward and really address this next challenge that we have. That's what I have, Chairman.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about that campaign as well and can't wait to see some results from it. All right, let's introduce Dwayne Scott, Deputy Commissioner. Welcome.
Good morning.
It's okay, clap.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's nice to hear from you and good to know your background and your dedication to what we're trying to accomplish. All right. We also have a newly appointed Workforce Services Assistant Commissioner, Steve Plale. Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to turn this on, make sure that it is on. We're good? All right. Good morning, everyone. Steve Plale. I'm the new Assistant Commissioner for the Division of Workforce Services here at the Department of Labor and Workforce Development. I'm excited to be here. I've had the opportunity to be a part of this board previously, to present to this board previously in my former role as a Senior Director in the Division of College, Career, and Technical Education at the Tennessee Department of Education. Good to see my former boss, Gene Luna, here, representing Commissioner Schwinn. I'm excited to be in this role and be a part of this work. I believe, there's a few things that I believe and why I took this position or sought out this opportunity. I believe in the importance of work, and I believe that we as human beings are dignified through our work. We find pride in our work. We find value, and other people find value in what they do in their work. And so that is important to me. I also know the power of education and training. And when we can connect those two, when we can connect work with education and training, it can be transformative for people. And that's what this division is doing, and that's what we are going to continue to do. And some of the priorities that I have, Chairman already mentioned one, but it would be around having high-quality processes in place to ensure consistent delivery of our services. And I think that starts with the board. I think it starts here with the state board and certification of the state board, and also how that can be a model for certification of our local boards and what that looks like. The process and the services that are provided for our veterans, for those who are justice involved, for those who are still in school, who are doing work-based learning experiences and participating in those apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships. That having a consistent kind of method of delivery for those services is important. It can look different whether you're in Mountain City or you're in Memphis or anywhere in between, but we have a responsibility to ensure that it's consistently high quality across the state. So I'm excited about this work. I'm excited about the role, and I'm excited to be here and partner with the State Workforce Board and our local boards. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge our executive directors who are here, who help, and board staff, local board staff who help to lead that at the local level, and our regional directors who are also here in attendance. Appreciate them being here. The last thing that I would like to mention to the State Workforce Board is our upcoming workforce convening, Refocus Tennessee. We would like to invite all of you as State Workforce Board members to this Refocus Tennessee convening in August. It will be an in-person conference convening over 2.5 days at the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center here in Nashville, August the 18th through the 20th. We would love to have you there, participate in that convening, and hear from all of the state workforce agencies who are involved in the workforce system, workforce development system as a whole, and then talk through some very specific things on we're wanting to leverage here in Tennessee to help meet the demand of our employers. It's critically important. And so we look forward to that and want to invite you there. And with that, Chairman, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Unemployment update. Rusty, are you here today? All right.
I ask that every day.
He's not kidding. Thank you all for having me. For those of you who know me and very few that don't, I'm Rusty Phelps. I'm the Assistant Commissioner that's over unemployment insurance for the state. And so today, my update is going to be a little different. First of all, it's good to see all of you again. The last few have been virtual, but I'm going to do something a little different today. The last year or so, anytime I was asked to talk about my program, unemployment insurance, I found myself starting out with some nervous laughter and maybe a comment to deflect because there was a lot of attention and a lot of pressure and a lot of confusion. But I found I didn't like that about myself, and I didn't think it was a good representation of my division for all the good that we had done. So recently, with that on my mind, I was in a conversation with a wise person who I respect a ton. And this person looked at me and said, it's time for you and the UI division for what you've done to hold your head up, be proud of your accomplishments, and brag a little bit. So that's what I'm going to do today. So despite the uncertainty of the last year and a half, the years of claims and all the workload that we had no way to prepare for or know about, never before seen programs in the unemployment programs such as federal programs that paid people that have never been eligible before, limited trained resources because I'm federally funded and I was funded for a 3.5% unemployment rate, and then within 2 months it was at 15. So we had all these factors going against us that all of you in the room know and you've heard about. So I'm not going to bore you with any more of that. I'm going to talk about some of the fast, innovative things that my team did with no warning. They came up with ways to process claims faster and try to stay within their federal standards and regulations. And that's something to keep your head up about. With no warning, they did those things. They were top 10 in the country for implementing 2 or 3 of the federal programs they had never seen and had no warning about, but they got in a room and they came up with a way to do that. That makes me extremely proud, and it should make us all extremely proud. But what makes me prouder about that particular point is it was never a race that my team viewed as against other states and our counterparts around the country. It was actually a race for Tennesseans that my team took very seriously, and so I think that's a reason to be proud. Finally, I'm going to brag on something. This last fact is mind-blowing. In a normal year, my division, the UI division, will pay out roughly $200 million in unemployment benefits. That's a lot of money. $200 million, give or take, in a regular year. In the last 15 months, the UI division in this state has paid out $7.5 billion, with a B, benefits to Tennesseans that desperately needed it, that needed their bills paid, that needed food on the table, and that, I think, is something to really brag about. And so, when I think about the unemployment division, I'm not talking about anywhere else in the country. They can speak for themselves. But when I'm talking about Tennessee's unemployment division and what my team has done, there's a quote that I'm reminded of by a famous American. Now, I know I've got Deputy Scott's attention because he's a sucker for a good quote just like I am. That quote was by John Wayne, and it simply says, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." And I know that during the past 15 months, my team faced uncertainties with COVID, family concerns, all those things that other Tennesseans faced, but they found a way to do those things. And so I think that's something to really be proud of from our department standpoint. Even though I've got a lot to brag about, we also still have a lot to do, as Commissioner Mccord says all the time, and we got to be cognizant of that. If any of you know, the full circle of unemployment insurance is we still have a lot of claims to process. Hopefully that's going to drop off as Governor Lee's order to stop paying out federal programs on July 3rd gets even closer. We see our numbers going down, but you have to remember we've had years upon years upon years of work in the last 15 months. So we've still got claims to process. In the process of doing those claims, that brings about the next level in our division. It creates appeals where employers and claimants alike can disagree and have that reheard if they don't like the decision. So we got a number of those left. It also brings about big efforts in our integrity unit where we investigate cross matches, overpayments, refusals of work, and failures to return that we're encouraging our employer base to report. It also involves recovery of funds. If someone drew unemployment that shouldn't have drawn unemployment, we have to know about that. It has to go back in our trust fund or it has to go back to the federal government. And lastly, our employer accounts unit will be inundated over the next year and a half with questions about, will this affect my account and how will this be charged and how we go about doing those things. So that leads me back, all the work we've yet to do, that leads me back to the conversation with the wise person I was telling you about earlier that said it's time to keep your head up, be proud of what you've done, and brag a little bit. That wise person is my Deputy Commissioner, Denise Thomas. And she deserves a lot of credit for supporting me and my division the last 15 months. A ton of credit. I wouldn't be standing here right now if it wasn't for her and Commissioner Mccord and a bunch of others. But any of you that know Deputy Commissioner Thomas, in conversations, the conversation I was having with her recently where she said those same things, I noticed she kept using the word, "I'm including you," a lot. And if you know her very well, that means she's informing me that in spite of all the work that we have done and yet to do, Denise believes that my division can play a key role in helping Steve and his division get people back to work. And that's the most important thing we can do in this state. Not because they'll be off my unemployment rolls, but because they need to be in the workforce, and that has to be our priority now. So I'm promising, and my division is promising, that we will partner any way we can to help to get Tennesseans back in that workforce. Because Denise is right and spot on, as she usually is, as she's informing me. We need to be innovative and relook at anything and everything. We can't be scared to succeed. You know, Denise says to me all the time, we've got to set expectations and we've got to partner, just like people in this department ran to support the unemployment division. You guys, as you transition out, got to run to do this, and she's exactly right. We have to prioritize, we have to relook at several things. We need to relook at how can UI help? What data can I provide to say we have this many people unemployed here, we have this many jobs here, whatever I can provide and my team can provide, we're going to be there to do that. To her point, we need to look at rapid response. Can we do that? in a different way and be a national leader in that regard. Reemployment services with RISA, and so many other ways. So the UI division, again, looks forward to moving forward with you and Steve and the workforce partners. And Chairman Barry, I thank you, and if I took too long, I apologize. It's easy to brag when you got something to brag about. Do you have any questions for me? A couple of questions.
I'm glad you took the advice, because if there's anyone who needs to brag on some accomplishments, it's you. You've done a fantastic job, and I know that you've supported our, you're right, this team is all about getting folks back to work. In the crazy year, you took care of those folks well, so that we could get them back to work, and so thanks for really caring for them in the meantime.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
have several hundred people in my division that deserve to be standing here and hear that as well.
Yeah, absolutely true. Any other questions for Assistant Commissioner Phelps? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Okay, well, we've heard a little bit about this deputy commissioner, so I couldn't agree more with what Rusty said. She had the opportunity to represent this state well up on the Hill, so why don't you tell us about that?
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Barry, to you, to Vice Chair Hatcher, and to the members of this State Workforce Board. Thank you. We're so happy to see you live and in person. And I will attempt to be brief with my updates. I want to say this before we even get started. I love to stand before you and tell you that I came up with all this information you're going to see, but a lot of credit goes to John Colbert in Washington, D.C., who does a phenomenal job keeping states are really apprised on what's on the minds of Congress, as if anybody knows what's on the mind of Congress. But he does a pretty good job trying to make that pretty concise for us, so we'll kind of know where the puck is going to drop. And so this will be something a little new that we're doing for the board, is to try to make you aware of what we hear around some federal updates, because that in turn will inform the direction that Tennessee takes. And so hopefully this will be information that you will find useful. We'll try to move away from some of the federalese if we can. So as Chairman Barry mentioned, mid-April, and I say we had, although I got a chance to participate in the hearing, it was really a representation of the state, and I appreciate Rusty's kind words, but it's never about an individual. We had an opportunity to really talk about COVID recovery as it pertains to workforce. So at the invitation of Chairwoman Murray, and Ranking Member Burr, we had an opportunity to talk to the Senate Help Committee. And the goal of that was to really provide some testimony as to what we were seeing in Tennessee, and thankful that they saw us as a national model that they could really glean from. And so the purpose of this hearing was to really kind of hear what is it going to take to help Tennesseans and Americans at large get back to work, what would be needed in terms of support, policy, those types of things. So that's a little bit of a shot for the room. I did it virtually. There were a couple of, I was joined by 3 other panelists. 2 were present, 2 were virtual. And these are sort of the highlights, and I won't read those to you. I won't bore you. I know you have this in front of you. But those were a little bit of the sort of the priorities that we lifted to them. And I want to really emphasize, for us, we understand that there's a lot of jobs available in Tennessee. We're really fortunate to be in this place in our state, but we still see, as my partner in the great cause, Deputy Sherelle Campbell-Street can attest to, we're still seeing some common challenges around worker supports, right? Transportation, childcare, those types of things. So there's still a need to advance those that are sort of ready to jump back in and continue to help those that are still returning to sort of lower skill jobs, to try to help those folks be able to move up. We also talked a lot about greater investment, and this is not just an ask of dollars, because oftentimes it's like states are asking for more money. What we're saying is that we would like to see stability in that funding and greater investments before something happens. If you'll recall, with the onset of COVID, there was a lot of what I call episodic funding, right? They were putting out money for this and putting out money for that. Well, you get this deluge of funds that's very, very specific, that's very limited, and it doesn't give you an opportunity to really do anything broad-based. So for us, it's like, don't just give us the money when something happens, give us the money so we can plan for the what if. And so that was a big focus that we heard from other folks on the panel as well. And then also making sure that these policies at the federal level are aligned so that we don't have to hash this out at the state level, right? There are a variety of federal agencies that are coming together to support workforce, but some of those policies are in contradiction to each other. And oftentimes we're left to figure that out at the state level. And so I thought I would insert this. This is a little bit of insight into the U.S. Department of Labor budget that they've submitted to Congress. And again, I won't read this, but it kind of gives you some idea about where they're looking to make investments. And again, we can see, and we're happy to see, that there'll be some increase into workforce programming across the country. Again, this represents sort of the national budget. This is not how much Tennessee would get. I think we would all be sort of breaking out in a round of applause if this was our funding, but this is sort of the national level funding, and of course that's all based on a formula when it comes to the states. But it's good to know that they are investing in some things that will have a direct impact on workforce projections and workforce planning and strategy here in our state. This is important for our state workforce board because what it allows us to do is really gain a posture of planning before we actually get the dollars so that we can make sure that whatever funds we get, we can turn it around and have a return on an investment when these things hit. Now, there's an opportunity. This is a proposed budget. It may dwindle, but these are some things that will be a part of that ask. And again, the testimony was really to make sure, are these the right investments to make? The American Jobs Plan, which you've probably heard about, has been, sort of been the talk around workforce development at the national level. This is sort of a breakdown of what is included in that particular program. A lot of this funding will be directed to states, although there are some particular scenarios where we will see sort of some direct funding to local boards and community agencies. I will tell you sort of the middle of the page there, that TAA style comprehensive supports, not to bore you, but our trade assistance program is kind of in limbo right now. For a long time, states really struggle with getting sort of a fair amount of money for our trade program, which can only be used if there's offshoring of jobs to other countries. So it's really a good thing not to use that money, right? Because it means that our jobs are staying in our country. However, when we don't have that level of trade activity, those funds have to be reverted. There's no other allowable use. So essentially, they're giving us money we can't use, and we're sending it right back. So there's been a lot of dialogue about making good use of those funds. So they're thinking about repurposing those, but we are grossly late on that conversation, meaning they have not told us exactly what that's going to look like, but that also is making its round again in the American Jobs Plan. Sort of continuing on this, one of the things that we are probably the most excited about is, again, middle of the page, is the $8 billion for Wagner-Pfizer for evidence-based intensive individualized services. This is important because what we find right now is that career exploration is going to be extremely important. A couple of years ago, the Wagner-Pfizer budget at the federal level was zeroed out. They were going to not give us any funding at all, right, for that program. And so states had to rally to really show the value of having this funding. So it's good to see that they're looking to make greater investments. That career exploration and career guidance is going to be critical. We're seeing for folks that are looking to get back to work, they're figuring out, do I go back where I came from or do I do something different? It takes a guiding hand to help them get there. So that is essentially what that funding is for. So we're happy to see that will remain. And then lastly, there'll be additional work for us to look at expanding career and technical education. Chief Luna, I know you're excited to see that happening on the labor side of the budget because, again, that's such a valued partnership, and it really takes multiple agencies to get that done. But labor and education have to be arm in arm there. So they are talking about expanding that, and I also think that will underpin some of the work with the community college partnerships, and then again, the $1 billion for reentry. As you know, with the work and guidance of this board, it started reentry many years ago, but without funding. And so we're super excited to be able to stand before you today and not just be the recipients of some of those federal reentry grants, but are pleased that there was a state investment in the governor's budget for that $2 million that we can do reentry more holistically, so we can start to serve people at the point of need, which is before they are released from incarceration. So we're super excited about that. And then lastly, what we think we'll continue to see is an expansion of registered apprenticeships. We know that the National Registered Apprenticeship Act was reauthorized, but we do think there'll be some tweaks and changes to that as well. This middle bullet is very important. Part of, again, the testimony was around WIOA reauthorization. If you may remember, those are longstanding on the board. WIA, which preceded WIOA, was around for 17 years before they touched it. Typically, an act is up for reauthorization in about 5. So we're happy to see they're talking about reauthorization, but what we've heard is that it'll be tweaks, not a major overhaul. So some things that we kind of were hoping to see a little bit different. They're looking to move fast, so they may not get to that. The last word we got on last week is they're hoping to have it reauthorized as quickly as next week. That may or may not happen. If it does, we will be sure to get information out to this board as soon as we hear of that. But again, we're not expecting anything substantial. We know that the hearings have wrapped up, testimonies have wrapped up, and so now it's in their capable hands. And lastly, UI reform is being talked about a lot. We've not gotten anything substantial. I think Rusty is absolutely right. Shifting his team to a reemployment will be a huge focus, as well as attempts to combat fraud and misuse in the program. And I know that was a lot. That's why we made sure this is in front of you. I would love to tell you that we know we can read the workforce tea leaves, but we can't. We are trying to get information and synthesize it as best we can to make sure that we are providing you with the information we need to plan and move forward. But I will tell you, I like the positioning of where we are, and I think whatever comes, we'll be able to very quickly implement because of the innovations of this incredible team here in the department. So with that, Chairman Berry, I will yield for if there are any questions at all from the group.
Questions for Deputy Commissioner?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, under the American Jobs Plan, you talked about the trade adjustment assistance kind of being reworked. In the state, particularly, we're seeing a lot of increase in terms of tech jobs and that kind of thing. So as people transition that or trying to find are they gonna rework this? Are they talking about reworking it where people can access training to really improve their skills so that they can have access to some of those really high quality jobs?
I will tell you, we're hoping that's the direction they will take. But it's really hard to know in that there are multiple sources they can use to accomplish just that. On one of the slides, it talked about sector, which is sort of a new sectoral strategy they're going to be focusing. So there's been some conversation about, do we earmark dollars for specific sectors, right, such as IT, healthcare? We have the ability to do that now, but they have to make those investments and make them general enough that we can move dollars as we see fit. With trade, it's just here. If they truly position it to be worker support, or if we can use that money for training, because we've said for years in Tennessee, if you allow us to use trade dollars to do incumbent worker, then a company is less likely to leave and offshore because they can train their workforce here. Right. So that's one of the things that I know they're looking at as well. So what we're hoping is that this opens up avenues that we can use this funding for training or continuing training to help businesses that so desperately need it. All right, thank you, Chairman Berry.
Very good. Okay, we had committee meetings prior to this board meeting, and so now we want to hear some reports about what happened in all of those meetings. So let's start with the Oversight Committee. Ann Hatcher, what happened at your meeting?
Okay, what happened? So we have 2 work groups reporting up to the Oversight Committee, and we spent the most time with the Fiscal and Reporting Work Group. This group, their charge for this committee meeting was to come and to talk about some KPIs that they wanted to start tracking across adult education, workforce services, and vocational rehabilitation. So the KPIs that those groups had decided included total enrollments, barriers to employment, and then expenditures. So each of those groups shared, you know, what that has looked like for 2018, 2019, and 2020 across their programs. So the committee, you know, in reflecting on this, first of all, recognized how hard it is, certainly those of us who work in business and anywhere else, for cross-departmental collaboration on defining outcomes. Like, you can spend days and days and days trying to define some of those things. So really commended the groups for the work that it takes just to come up with those three. And then we went at it. We had a lot of fun talking about, all right, like, how do you define your KPIs? What are the objectives, you know, that you're trying to measure around? What are the outcomes that we're looking for as a group? What are the right KPIs? How do you look at those in terms of ratios, right, versus just a static number? So just lots of discussion around that. And our outcomes there were probably to have a midterm session with some of the members of the committee with that work group, just to dig in a little bit more into that framework, so that by August, you know, we've helped them kind of advance a couple levels deeper on that framework. But it was great discussion. I think we're all really focused on helping to figure out what are those right measures that matter. And so then that left precious little time for the Joint Monitoring and Compliance Work Group presentation. This group is really focused on policy and has made progress on the key policies. When we met last, they wanted to focus on drafting the co-enrollment and one-stop design policy. One challenge that they've had in working across those areas, workforce services, VR, and adult education, is that at the local workforce board level, there's not sort of there's not accountability at the local workforce level for all the funds in those different programs. So coming up with a combined policy and accountability is a little bit difficult there. So those of us who don't work in government had to kind of wrap our minds around, like, how does that even work? So we had some discussion there. And so I think that the work for that particular group over the summer is to really focus on the one-stop design policy, that being sort of the foundational underpinnings of how everything else works. And then I think they're going to work next on the co-enrollment policy. So we'll look forward to hearing about those in August.
Very good. Any questions for Ann? Comments? You know, in my few years, I'm going to ramble for a little bit just because I can. You know, in my
I took that privilege in my committee meeting as well. Thank you. Enjoy.
In my few years on this board, and particularly for newer members of the board, we've really shifted more toward this, what's the measurement, right? What's the KPI? And so I appreciate you taking a good amount of time of your discussion to focus on that. So, because you know, there's business-minded people on this board for a reason. The governor comes from a business mindset, so I know that's the way he thinks. And I mean, that's the way we should be reporting. So if you're going to give a presentation to this committee, to whomever that might be in the future, whoever's going to come up here, you better be prepared with some KPIs. You better be prepared for the question that says, so what are you supposed to be hitting and how are you doing against that number? I haven't been in a meeting yet where that question hasn't been asked of someone who's presenting. So it's something that this board is interested in. It's something that you better be prepared for if you're going to be reporting to this board. And when we talk about this certification that we're trying to get, that's going to be a key element to making sure that we do that. So soapbox dismounted. And any other questions for Ann? Okay, thank you. Stuart, tell us about Operations Committee and what went on there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the Operations Committee, we had a very busy agenda. We likewise had, we had 3 work group presentations, but we also had 2 program updates. I'll start with the program updates. Kristen Halverson with the Tennessee Department of Human Services provided an overview of the fiscal 22 SNAP Employment and Training State Plan to include discussion on components and service strategies outlined in the plan. It's a requirement for the authorized state agency to consult with the State Workforce Development Board on the SNAP Employment and Training State Plan to ensure alignment with the Tennessee workforce goals and visions. And so she addressed that in her presentation and did a great job. The second program update was a summer youth work experience program. Carla Garrett with the Tennessee Department of Labor provided an overview and update on the Summer Youth Work Experience Initiative. The initiative supporting local efforts that focuses on learn and earn opportunities, life skills, and work skills for the youth that aims to increase youth employment and educational attainment. Youth between the ages of 14 and 24 are able to work on-site with an employer and earn competitive wages. This initiative runs from May 3rd of 2021 through August 31st of 2021. And they have a minimum of 530 youth across the state. That is a minimum number. They emphasize that their aspirations are for much higher than that. But in order to validate the program, that's a number that they're aiming to hit and exceed. So we also had, I'll move into the work group presentations. We had a job seeker work group presentation, business service work group presentation, and apprenticeship work-based learning work group presentation. I'll start with the job seeker. The job seeker work group, they're convening on a quarterly basis. They have 5 key objectives, which include creating an integrated intake system to efficiently deliver services, something Ann was referring to. So there was definitely a common theme among each of the work groups around not only, what are they trying to establish in the way of better services offered, more efficient servicing offered, but also how do we communicate that out and make sure that our people delivering that information are aware of them and can make sure we're communicating clearly the opportunities that exist for our job seekers. Going on with their objectives, create a shared vision for supporting Tennesseans with the greatest number of barriers to enter the workforce, and we'll focus on that particular point here in a moment. But again, continuing with the job seeker work group, create a trained workforce to meet current industry needs, create new dashboards to measure the effectiveness of integrated workforce strategy, and create a simple and effective engagement experience for all. So that's a daunting challenge when you consider the array of great offerings that we have. Their initial focus, they zeroed in on some of their initial conversation efforts on barriers. What are barriers to job seekers? Then the one they're tackling first are job seekers who have child care needs. And so they are working to establish a clear, comprehensive way to offer, first of all, to discern that a job seeker has a child care need, and then equip our people to help guide them on how we provide for that. So the second work group was the business services work group, and they have and if my memory serves me correct, I think they're meeting every 2 weeks thus far. So they're on a fairly ambitious tempo, let's put it that way. And they have 2 goals they're zeroing in on initially. One is to develop a business services lexicon by agency, and with the goal of developing the most efficient distribution system. These resources will allow each agency to be resource coordinators and get employers connected to the right resources and services across each region of the state. Again, another work group that's zeroing in on the understanding that it's challenging to engage with what we offer. There is a lot going on, and it's difficult for job seekers, but it's also difficult for employers to understand it well. And so this effort is zeroing in on creating an understanding of the language we use, an understanding of sort of demystifying everything and helping to give employers and people who engage with workforce services an understanding of what's happening and how to reach it. A second goal they're working on is organize and select a statewide employer advisory committee. This goal was recommended during the March 2021 meeting with the Operations Committee. Part of, I'll just continue. The team developed a statewide employer advisory committee to support State Workforce Board Business Services Work Group. Sectors identified across the state to be represented on the committee are construction, healthcare, hospitality, IT, logistics, advanced manufacturing, and small business. So those 7 sectors have been identified as representation on this advisory committee. And then, continuing on with this work group, their deliverable actions through 2022. Identify challenges and roadblocks across each region. Develop a crosswalk document, which is fundamentally a menu of services that identifies cross-agency services that have possible funding opportunities. 3, employer surveys. They'll partner with the Chamber of Commerce on employer feedback. And then lastly, develop a statewide business services dashboard. They'll develop and design a dashboard template that will be utilized and used by the state to report quarterly analytics that employers want to see. And then the third work group presentation was the Apprenticeship Work-Based Learning Work Group. Their objective is to establish scalable partnerships that meet employer workforce development needs by developing and implementing registered apprenticeship programs and developing clearly defined talent pipelines through work-based learning, internships, and pre-apprenticeship programs. We spent a good bit of our time focused on the pre-apprenticeship program component. In terms of their goals, they are addressing skill gaps, the definition of this slide is the rationale for the overarching goals, is to address skill gaps, improve employer recruitment, retention, onboarding, and productivity, share promising apprenticeship work-based learning implementation practices, and ensure stakeholder satisfaction. Like I said a moment ago, we spent a good bit of time talking about the pre-apprenticeship programs, and they have currently 7, soon to be 8 program sponsors that are already on board. This program is designed, and it's going to be a structured program that's designed to prepare pre-apprenticeship members out there who are looking for work in any of the identified categories that have apprenticeship programs. It provides a program to prepare them to enter into that program and position them favorably with the employer to be an obvious choice for the employer to choose them as someone that would occupy one of their apprenticeship program positions. So we're excited about that. There's ongoing engagement and of course, building momentum with that. And so that is my report. Sorry, I think I started accelerating towards the end.
No, you're fine. Any questions?
We went over.
Any questions for Stuart or the Operations Committee? All right. Kevin, you oversee the Innovation Committee, and I think we have some policies to vote on this time. So tell us about your meeting.
Yes, sir. Our committee was opened by Ms. Teresa Smith. She welcomed all the members and went over the agenda that we'd be covering today. The first thing on our agenda was an update on what the Data and Performance Work Group has been doing since our last meeting. Mr. Rusty Rustigi and Mr. Ryan Allen shared the updates and future milestones that the group was working on. The purpose of our Data and Performance Work Group is used data and systems to drive innovations and future interrogation accountability among all Tennessee workforce partners in a quest to become the nation's premier workforce system. The objective of this work group is to provide stakeholders with performance data as well as program narrative and context that enables workforce partners to make strategic decisions and outcome-based solutions. In our discussion today, our team leads, Mr. Ryan and Mr. Rustigi, provided information on some current and outgoing projects that will help us move these visions forward in the state. Some projects such as P20 data system and the data for evidence-based collaborative workforce, the SAS or the SAS visualization dashboards, proactivity messaging to participants based on needs are all outgoing projects using technology to improve our systems and the customer experience. Mr. Allen then provided an overview of the WIOA performance outcomes and explained the U.S. Department of Labor measures and successfulness of the WIOA workforce programs. In his program presentation, he explained how they use their wages and records to see the participants of showing wage records after being served in our Tennessee workforce programs, determine the outcomes. They looked at what percentages entered the employment, the earning amounts of participants, the percentages of participants that were enrolled in the program, and got a skill gain that the percentage of programs that received a credential after the training. The department has worked with a software company, SAS, to develop a dashboard that shows a glance how the programs and LWDAs are performing. It's an interactive dashboard, so it allows for the comparison of local area to local area and will be helpful from program managers and stakeholders. So far, the department has worked with the SAS to create an unemployment dashboard and a labor market dashboard, which were shown as previous state board meetings. Mr. Allen then provided a demo of how the new workforce services dashboard works. Our next topic, as Ms. Ann has mentioned on the KPI, which was a key performance indicator. This is a policy that's going to require a vote in today's meeting. Tennessee strives to be the most effective and efficient state in the nation in serving individuals with WIOA services. In an effort to drive this innovation, the department developed additional metrics, KPIs, to ensure that we're serving the most participants that we could fund possibly, while focusing on particular customer groups that may experience barriers to employment. The division came up with 12 additional metrics that would drive increase enrollments and work with each of the local areas to agree on targets using baselines. Setting goals for increased enrollments for the local areas would not help to serve more participants, but would also help the LDAs to expend their funds on providing training, support the services and case management of the participants. These KPI measurements will work in conjunction with the federal performance measures and targets already in place. They began the KPI program in January of 21, and now are at the point where they need to make the metrics a routine part of the process by approving the KPI policy. Since we've been piloting the metrics, they have already seen examples of where they are measuring and setting goals for particular outcomes. They're also seeing drastic productivity changes and trends in the data. You should have received the KPI policy and executive summary in your documents. Again, this is the policy that we're voting on today.
Very good. Hopefully you've had a chance to review the policy in your pre-meeting notes, but I'll ask for a motion and a second to approve the policy as presented, and then that'll give us time for some discussion after. So do I hear a motion to approve the policy as presented by the Innovation Committee?
Jason Bates will make
Make the motion.
Jason makes the motion, a second? Got a second from Martha first, is who I heard it. All right, what discussion do we have, or questions do we have about the policy and KPIs and, maybe how, a little more detail on how they were selected, or questions about that? Yes.
Yes, sir. In listening to the three committee report outs, I think there was an awful lot of discussion we heard about KPIs.
Yeah.
And I have a little bit of a concern of the siloed nature, and do we have the committees aligned in discussion of what are the outcomes we're after and what are those KPIs? My only pause is, has that discussion been aligned to the entire group? Because I think everyone's working on a very similar, items, but I'm not sure the discussions and the congruity, important that's aligned.
Yeah,
Let me help a little bit maybe with this. So there's a lot of things going on. But basically what we have is a backward integration strategy for our agency and our sister agency. So we're moving, whether it's work in work-based learning programs to high school, backward integrating, or whether it's higher education coursework to adult education population, we're backward integrating, all trying to move work closer to education or at the same time of education, which you get paid while you learn, and some of your other barriers go down. So backward integration is across the whole, not just our agency. The second one is visibility. We need visibility into data, and we in our department have incredible capability to see things, and so we're after that to be able to see. So the visibility across agency, but not just across agency, across not our agency, but across the multiple agencies that make up the workforce development system as a whole. So we meet, and we have met just yesterday with the 6 other agencies that do workforce development stuff, and we have dashboards across those agencies as well. So backward integration down the value chain, ability to see where we're going and where we've been. And then the third, you hear the theme about, and I think it was well said, we're not always easy to work with because people don't understand what we're saying, or there's all this stuff going on that we don't know how to connect. And so that is part of ease of use, customer service theme that goes across the agency, our agency, and again, not just our agency, but the 6 other agencies that we meet with, so we can act as one system. So all the things that we hear, what those come from are those 3 themes that they rally around and are tied to. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, said differently, one of our objectives as a board has been to make sure that all the agencies that have a stake in this or a part in this are talking, and that they're not siloed. So the KPIs that the committees are discussing are really coming down from those agencies. And so it's not the agencies, or it's not the committees rather, coming up with the KPIs and pushing it up to the agencies. It's the other way around. And so the committees are just discussing further what the agencies are agreeing on that should be their best KPIs. Did I say that?
You did
Okay.
great.
All right.
Just one minute. So for oversight, I think it would be important to be understanding of what all those dashboards were, of those KPIs, of the outcomes that you're really focused on making sure we achieve, so that oversight can achieve oversight, right? Rather than reinventing its own KPIs, it needs to be against your KPIs, yes? That would help if we were educated on what those were.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah, so I think knowing what the KPIs, and as your job, looking at that and making sure that they connect, that they match, and I'm sure we can show the KPIs and actually demonstrate some of you hear dashboards a lot, but some of the capability there are in these dashboards are really, again, they're cross-agency, not just cross our department, which would be good to see and just give you a level of comfort, and also allow you to ask the hard questions if we've missed something.
Yes. So maybe, Commissioner, it's as we see the KPIs, maybe it's like the Dr. Mccord seal of approval on, these are the KPIs that I endorse and that
I think that's, yeah.
yeah.
I'm not a real doctor, though. I just
Well,
play one on TV. So nobody gets sick on me, just in case that was misunderstanding, but thank you. No, absolutely, and completely aware, and this does, a lot of this work is on Denise's side of the house, but it's also in Jean Luna, sitting two down from your side of the house, and Sherelle's side of the house, and so, again, I think our job is to give you a level of visibility into the visibility that we have, and we can go from there and figure out what the best method to do that is. And some of it just might be show and tell, and a high level of here's what we're trying to achieve, and show and tell, here's some of the things how it connects across these different agencies. So we can do that, whenever you want to set that up in the board meeting.
Okay.
Chairman Barry?
Yes.
We had good discussion in our group about it too, but, and I think it's a really good layout here, but when we talk about barriers to employment, workforce developer can impact all those groups with the programs that we have, but broadband isn't measured. Broadband access as a factor. So I don't know what group, particularly rural Tennessee, as a group, I guess, but is there a way that we can measure that? And the workforce developer does not have money to lay broadband fiber, I understand that, but it would give this body the ability to cross over to the economic development side to address that as a workforce issue.
Yeah, I think, I would respond to that by saying, it's probably not a KPI for what we're trying to achieve of putting people back to work, but it is gonna be a tactic that is gonna make putting people back to work easier.
Yeah.
Right? So I think, not necessarily a number measurement that we look at, but it probably needs to be a task that we're constantly hearing reports on. Is that fair?
Yes, and it will be a metric that we can refer to. There will be as we move, we have funding, and as we move, and that's a very good point, not just the infrastructure there, but access, how many people are actually accessing, because we're gonna have barriers to access that even if you have fiber in your neighborhood. And so there'll be measures, rural specifically, and as we go to the rural summit, that's a good thing to talk about, but also just across the state that we can point to. But it's a very good point. But there's another that's being covered that anytime we want to look at, we can refer to that metric in terms of broadband, because it is an economic development and a workforce. They all kind of go together.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, so really basic question then. The KPI discussion that we were having today in oversight, is that designed to be the entirety of the fulfillment of this policy, or is it just a subset of it? How do those two things connect?
So I'm gonna have to turn around.
Sound like it's on when that road turns around.
So Vice Chair Hatcher, I think one point of clarification is the KPI is really designed to start with enrollments and to get to a level of base measurement based on feedback we heard from this board and to Chairman Berry's earlier point. So this is not the end-all be-all for KPI. If you recall, there were sort of soft targets that were implemented that they've all been working on for some time. So this kind of makes those targets hard, put them in a policy so we can start measuring with enrollments. And then over time, those KPIs will expand, but we're not there yet. We've kind of reached this sort of kind of step one, this first rung on the ladder.
Thank you. But what we reviewed today is directly connected to this policy.
The
In
data
the
that
Oversight Committee.
you were in oversight, I'm sorry, I'm looking at Ivan. Yes.
Yes, it's the same thing.
Yes.
That was step one of the fulfillment of this policy.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I had to look to Ivan because I wasn't in oversight, so I just wanted to make sure. Thank you, Chairman Berry.
That's good, and hopefully that makes Rick's question a little more clear as well, that what the oversight was talking about is directly connected with this policy.
And maybe they'd like to see Alan's presentation on the video because it showed the overlay of RPIs or KPIs. You could go into a certain tab and show your region versus their region and how they overlay and which one's up or down in his presentation.
Okay. Good questions, good discussion. Further?
So in this policy then, now it's framing up a little bit more to me than kind of at first. This policy effective date is now? Yes, June 18th through 2023. So the idea on this policy is it rolls out in stages as these KPIs. So we're not using these KPIs obviously yet to hold anyone accountable because it's still in development. I mean, help me understand sort of the time frame, I guess, for affecting this policy.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, so with the those KPIs, there, as Deputy Thomas mentioned, going to be hard targets. So through May or so, we work with the boards to establish or negotiate what those targets are going to be. And so each quarter, we will be looking at where they are and making some assessments based on thresholds identified in the policy. So it's actually starting on June 18th and being measured quarterly and following up with them to make sure that they're hitting those targets.
Targets for enrollment.
Yes. So there's graduations in there identified, if you're not 75% of your targeted number, what consequences or remedies will be made if you're not meeting those targets are all kind of identified in the policy there. But it does start currently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, on that discussion, I'm taking this as we are putting some formal structure around the expectation of KPIs across all our groups, across all our efforts, and that this is the guiding document for everyone to use as you're creating the KPIs that are relevant to your objectives. And those objectives, of course, are aligned with the state's objectives, and so is what I'm gathering the intent of this is, and I don't know if your question or you were aiming that maybe it's a specific KPI effort. I think it's a general framework, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said. Yeah, it's essentially saying, we're gonna focus on this. This is the guideline which you should use to build your KPI, to make sure it's relevant, to make sure it's in line with our objectives, and that it's consistent across all agencies and committees.
Tim, if I can just say, that helps a lot, because
Yeah.
what we thought we were seeing was the complete KPI, what we're supposed to do oversight on. By clarifying, we're only talking about, one number right now, right, enrollment, because I think potential enrollees versus who are enrolled as a percentage is critical on enrollment, because with COVID, you have one number. When we're in our normal 3.5% unemployment, it's a very different ratio of possible targets versus who's enrolled. I just think that needs, but that's a simple fix from the data. I think we can clean that up quick. We were thinking we were trying to achieve all 5 of the areas in the oversight. So I think that really helps. Thank you for that, that you're just part 1 right now of the KPIs.
Chairman Barry, am I correct to understand that this is just a starting point with enrollment here, and on a quarterly basis, this board is going to review the KPI, the key performance indicators, each quarter? So this is going to be an evolving process that is beginning here, but certainly not the end all today. Is that a correct assumption?
That's correct, and we were actually having that sidebar just a moment ago. Enrollment isn't the goal here with KPIs, right? That's just the starting point, but we have to start somewhere. But we're looking for the outcomes of enrollment, ultimately, right? Not just that we have participants enrolling in X program, but what are the actual outcomes of that program? Did they get a job? Is one big one. I think that we probably need to have in our KPIs, if I can say that. I'm still new enough, Commissioner, that I can say these things. But that is the ultimate goal of this and the update that would be provided throughout this policy, and updates with the board, working with our partners at the local board as well.
And this really rolls under priority number 4, right? Where we're looking at how we develop these dashboards to help measure the effectiveness of the system. We talked about populations, making sure that it's focused on those SBE, where have barriers to employment in our committee, oversight committee. We also talked about maybe looking at targets around funding or expenditures, right? We talked about expenditures, could that be a target, right? Maybe they should be at, when we look at the fiscal report, looking at where the funding is, how they're spending the money, maybe expenditures could be a target, right? We also talked about enrollments, which we were already talking about. So those were the 3 kind of data points that we were looking at. And I apologize if that wasn't kind of clear in our oversight committee, but there's only one current metric that we're looking at as far as this initiative, and that's enrollments right now. So that's what we're looking at.
Yes. Microphone, please. Just make sure I hear you.
Is it possible to get good data on the population, the number of population subgroups before we set goals? Setting goals is so critical. Our employers in this state are begging for employees. And the better job that we do in serving those individuals that meet barriers to employment is going to help everybody overcome the COVID problem. And if we can get the data, I know at one time in my life you had data out there that told you how many people across this state or what percentage of people across the state actually fell into that category. And if we have that data, then we would, I guess, have better numbers as to what that goal should be set out for this organization.
Yes, we still have that data.
Well, it was very refreshing to hear Deputy Commissioner Denise talk about all the possible funding that could be coming into the state and how that funding could help to serve these subgroups. So that was the question I had. Thank you.
Yes, it's there. Thank you. Yes, Kevin.
Back on the KPIs, maybe I gave a bad presentation of the policy, but to your question, Mr. Jackson, yeah, enrollment is the first part of this rolling out. I think they said it was actually like 285 total metrics that we could get into and to look at, but there were so many of them, we would have spent our whole time on just that. So they've just showed the one metric, which is enrollment at this time, but there are many more, and you're right, it's going to come out every quarter. They're going to pick a different one the next time, and so on. So you haven't heard the last of KPIs.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
to clear up a little bit.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, we're still in the middle of a vote here, so I think the discussion has been thorough. I feel better about the clarity that has been given. I just want to make sure everybody who's been asking questions and making comments feels that's the same, and you still have some muddy to clear up.
So this is a policy. It's probably more of a process. in what's documented here, but it's a policy. And so this policy, there are hard targets for each of the local areas by quarter for enrollment. And I think what I read in here is that failure to meet the hard target may result in something, right? That's what happens in a policy. So my question is, and these hard targets have been negotiated with the local areas. So local areas have all signed off on these hard targets for every quarter. They are committed to these targets, is the question. They are. Good, thank you. And everybody understands how they're measured, what the definitions are.
Sessions conducted, went through.
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Yes. Good. Okay, so with that clarity and fantastic discussion, very productive, we're ready to take the vote. All in favor of accepting the policy with all the clarity discussed, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That policy passes. Okay. Because this group is so interested in numbers, the next man is the man you want to hear. So Ivan Greenfield, if you would come on up here and tell us about the fiscal update.
Hey, excuse me, Mr. Berry. I've got two other topics that we went over.
Man, keep going.
Sorry. We had a presentation by Miss LaToya Newsom, was telling us about her special projects. The project that she brought to our attention this morning was the Project REAP, which is a reentry in employment adult education program, jail-related. It's all tablet-based. They have they get like a 10-inch screen Galaxy device, has a military case on it where it can't be destructed. It is connected to Wi-Fi, but the Wi-Fi is secure. They monitor their access and what they're limited to, but they have access to doing educational stuff, some rehab, workforce development, and reentry into the program, learning management systems. It's live video where they're live with the instructor where they can only see the instructor. And also there's some professional development to help them with their skills. Right now, this program's in the pilot program. They have 72 tablets divided up amongst 3 facilities. And they're current at 113 participants in that program. And our last presentation was brought to us by Miss Vicki Bunch and Miss Wood. When Mr. Graves came over to our committee, he thought it'd be a good idea for each region to bring over their best practice, what they thought. And they had a problem in Henderson County of not having enough affordable homes. So they went to the home builders and asked, what's the problem? And they said they had a problem with having enough skilled workers. So they got with the jail, and they gave like a pre-apprenticeship program, started training for the demand of that career. It provides skilled workers in areas of carpentry, electrical, plumbing, and bricklaying, and it also works on work ethics of helping those participants. This was a good program, and this is what was brought to us by the Southwest region. That concludes me.
I know. Sorry to have interrupted earlier.
you're good.
I'm glad that you did, because those were some great reports. I like to hear that kind of work going on. All right, any other questions for Kevin? Ivan, you're back up. All right.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you could hear me pretty good. As was alluded to earlier by Vice Chair Hatcher and Mr. Isaacson, we will look forward to having these KPIs presented during the fiscal review with the overall board. But the intent was to kind of identify what we were going to be looking at and utilizing that committee to help us look at what types of indices we could look at going forward. And so, again, that will be presented as part of this, but for purposes today, we're going to be looking at just really funding utilization. Ordinarily, this is workforce services top heavy, but we've added adult education, and we look to add other core partners, DHS's VR and TANF along the way. And so we're going to look at some overall expenditures, participants served. We'll talk about some of the challenges that we experienced and some opportunities, and finish up with key initiatives. We'll be looking at these numbers through third quarter, which ended March 31st of this year. So as you can see here, basically we saw an increase of about $20 million over last year, up to about $120 million in third quarter. I think is there a laser on this? No? Oh, sorry. Okay. I think there's a laser on here, but anyway. But we increased to about $120 million. That $20 million increase is basically from pandemic-related funds that we received. We'll talk a little bit more about those initiatives. And then it was offset by a decrease in some of our Title I money. We're looking at total expenditures of about $75 million over the period. And then those net positions are kind of static. There's some other things that kind of go in, and the numbers might adjust period over period, but that's so then looking at it just specific to workforce services, you see that workforce services make up $107 million of those numbers, authorized spending. You'll see that reduction year over year that we talked about as far as the $3.5 million in Title I funding. And you'll see that $24 million that we got in other programs which were related to we had a CARES initiative, which was about $9.5 million, and also a National Dislocated Worker Grant at about $14.8 million. Total expenditures, you see there at 67. Again, a 1 to 2/3 split between internal costs versus grants and subsidies, which are fundings that we put out to the local boards. And so you see that we ended up with through the third quarter, about $39.7 million, which indicates that our expenditures are trending a little down, which we anticipated because we know that some things impacted that as far as lower enrollments, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Looking at enrollments, 13,158 in the third quarter. Participant costs associated with Title I, about $9.4 million. And then at the end of the slide, we have some attachments that talks about the categories of services that went into that $9.4 million, so you have further details there. With adult education, you see that they had about $12.8 million in funding. Their expenditures are $7.6 for the programs that they have there, adult basic education, integrated English literacy and civics. But basically, those programs help folks like adults who have some competency deficits in maybe their math and their reading to be able to pass the high set or take other career and training courses. But you see that they were at about 7.6. Again, if you're looking at being 3 quarters through the year, spending is down a little bit. You see that they're about 59% expended, and about 5.2 as a net position through the third quarter. So challenges with funding, low enrollments, as it was talked about earlier, just didn't have access to various facilities, whether they were teaching institutions or jails. So that participation level was down. Funding limitations or caps. Deputy talked about some of the limitations that we were experiencing, especially around the CARES, not CARES, but National Dislocated Worker money, and then caps on the uses of the funds. Like in the AE's adult education's case, they are only able to use like 5% of their funds towards infrastructure costs. which it makes it hard for them to, to operate in all of the AJCs, where other programs can use both their administrative and programmatic dollars. And then potential funding reversions are specific to those two funding initiatives that I talked about earlier. The 9.5 that we received in CARES dollars, we used about 88% of that. And we're looking at potentially reverting back 800 to $1 million on those funds. And really the issue with that is primarily timing. When the funding first came out, we had about a 4-month period to utilize that, so it was a quick ramp up and turnaround. And then, subsequently it got extended another 4 months for state usage. But the impact was nevertheless, if we had the full 8 months or even the extension that the feds gave and eventually extended it a full year, I think we would have hit the target or exhausted the funds 100%. The other National Dislocated Worker Grant, we received about 14.8. Currently, we're tracking about just 2.1 million in expenditures. And that's largely attributable in talking to the local boards to let me talk about first. The focus of the award is on the impact, or it's a dislocated worker focused. I can't even get that out. Dislocated worker, but it was looking at part-time work experience for these dislocated workers impacted by COVID, and how to reduce that impact by putting them into short-term jobs that had these thresholds on them that made it very hard to kind of expend the funds, to utilize the funds. Also, when you look at labor force participation, some folks, due to emergency funding assistance, kind of, that $600 was more appealing to them as opposed to going to a subsidized work experience or temporary job. And then also multiple funding streams, right? I talked about the CARES money, but the CARES money came after this National Dislocated Worker allocation, but it had a shorter time period, so the emphasis kind of went to the CARES money, and then they shifted back to dislocated worker. All that to say that we're working right now with the local boards they're resubmitting revised budgets to us, and it's likely we're probably resending back upwards of 50% or more on that funding, which is significant. On to opportunities, as many have talked about, as far as joint and fiscal reporting. We're going to be enhancing that performance piece to include KPIs in the next go-around, or the enrollment KPIs specifically. And then, again, this addresses that priority number 4 and how we're effectively measuring the workforce system. And then increased partner engagements, which you've already heard about, so many opportunities across agencies. We got a lot of work going on with corrections, a lot of work going on with AE in making sure that we expand our access points around the 95 counties to provide greater access to services and connection to employment and training services. And then systems integrations and implementations. Part of the CARES dollars was used to invest in enhancing our Virtual American Job Center platform to really track the evolution of the participant from, scheduling an appointment to come in and receive services to landing a job and the wages underneath. And also we're implementing a new grants management system, which will be statewide, and, it will be one reporting structure for all of our core partners, Workforce Services, AE, Voc Rehab, and TANF. And so then finishing up with some key initiatives, I kind of talked about the grants management system rolling out January 22nd. The much debated, much talked about key performance indicators. And then, Summer Youth Initiative, $3 million, which we're very excited about, which gives 8 weeks of paid work experience to youths 14 to 21, and 500-plus youth there. And so we're looking forward to reporting back, hopefully some good numbers on that effort. And I think that wraps it up.
Very good. Questions? Comments? All right, thank you, Ivan. Okay. We are on time, as long as my closing remarks are brief, and they will be. We have a couple more meetings later this year. The next one is coming up August 27th, and then again November 12th. Unless otherwise announced, they'll be back in this facility. So again, it was fantastic to see everyone here and in person. Thank you for your participation and your patience, and have a fantastic summer. Anything else? All right, thanks. Meeting adjourned.